Hi, I'm Valerie Engelhardt, and in this video I am going to be painting a quick study using a single color. All I'm doing right there is showing that I was drawing a grid. I am using a piece of 8 by 10 Arches hot press paper, 140 pounds. And I'm going to keep this video at real speed so that you can see how slowly or quickly I work on certain areas. I'm using my size 8 silver black velvet watercolor brush, and it's my go-to brush. It is the one that I use for almost everything. I actually painted this a couple years ago now, almost exactly 2 years ago, as part of an Inktober prompt. And that brush is still going strong and still one of my favorites. So the reason I drew in a grid is off to the side I have a reference image, but I have it separated into values, and I do that using a Noten app, and the name of that particular app is Grid Painter, because it gives me a grid and it notenizes the image, so it puts it in black and white and shades of gray. It's different than just making your image grayscale, in that it separates the values, it breaks down the shapes to make them look far more simple. Now I am using a very wet mixture at the moment, and I'm only using one color, and that is Daniel Smith's Rose of Ultramarine. It's a lovely purple that separates, and the heavier pigment in there is, well, ultramarine. And this pigment will split with a lot of water, and I like that it separates into cooler and warmer tones. It's really beautiful. So the idea I'm going with right now is anywhere in my reference photo that is white, I'm leaving unpainted. And so right now I'm working just on my midtones. And with watercolor, yes, you need to work quickly because you need to, if you want wet in wet techniques done, you need to do it while the painting is wet. But notice that I'm not rushing, I'm not going super fast. It will stay wet for a while. Granted, there are some things that affect that, like how wet my brush is, how cool or hot my room is, what climate I live in. Because it's October and I live in the Pacific Northwest, it's pretty cool and wet here, so ideal for watercolor if you want it to stay wet for longer. Now, I haven't talked about what this painting even is, and the reference image I have is a woman who I think is wearing a hijab, and she's riding a horse. And I don't remember what the prompt was for this one, but I decided to do a woman riding a horse for that prompt. And that is pretty complicated for me. I don't usually do this. And part of my Inktober 2023 goal was to not only get a full painting done every day in roughly 30 minutes, but to have it involve people, because at the time especially I had avoided drawing or painting people just due to the intimidation of it. Now, I put this grid onto my paper using a marker that erases with heat, and at the very end of this video I will show you how I erase all those grid lines. Now, on the back of the pen that I used, or marker, there's an eraser, and I could use that, but because I put grids all over my paper, I use a hairdryer on a hot setting, and it goes away with heat. And I also use that kind of pen when I'm quilting, because I can draw on my quilt, and then when I iron it, the marks go away. However, I did discover that on certain fabrics, the line disappears, but it actually leaves the area white. And that's something similar to the paper. Whenever I eventually take these marks off, I personally was able to see that they were still there, but I knew they were there and I was looking for them. So I do wonder if somebody who didn't know I put those grid marks on my paper would have ever noticed. Now, while I'm painting, I'm looking down at the mouth area of the horse, and I love that watercolor bloom that is happening. I love different textures that form that I can't replicate. That's just the watercolor being watercolor. And paints like these that separate into multiple colors, they're so much fun. I recommend them. They're great to play with, and they're really great for these monochromatic type pieces because then you can just focus on shapes and values. You don't get hung up on color, but it still ends up interesting because you technically just used one color, but you get different tones and shades, and it's just really pretty and lots of fun. Let's see, I've actually got those markers. I've got a whole box of them. They're fine liners. And I'm sure you can tell, but the color is purple. I think that might have been the only color they offered, but I like purple because I use a lot of purples and it blends into a lot of what I do. I would rather use a color over black. And I don't know if I remembered to mention, I did, that this video is all in real time. So this video is less than 30 minutes long. So I was able to paint this piece in, well, according to my timestamp, it looks like 15 minutes. Now, even though I normally do not use a blow dryer, I will on these sort of paintings pull one out if I'm on a time limit. But I really don't want to do that if at all possible, because when you dry a painting with the blow dryer, you lose out on the magic of the textures that are naturally created by the watercolor. Like, look at the horse's face. We have a few different blooms happening. It's giving texture to shadow. It's giving this subject more life. And if I had just blow dried it, I would never have gotten those. Also, I find when I use a blow dryer, my watercolor ends up paler than if I just let it dry naturally. So that's two wins for just letting a painting dry naturally. Although I'm also really impatient and it is sometimes difficult to have to put something down. But notice my brush strokes. Once I make a stroke, I make it and I leave it. And I assume that you'd have to do that with a lot of different paints in that. So do you ever sketch with a pencil and you make a bunch of like little itty bitty jagged lines instead of a bold stroke? Try doing just one continuous stroke and leave it alone. So don't touch your paintings to see if they're dry, even though that's exactly what I just did. But then I went and put a darker, well, it's not really a darker color, a darker value on top to hide my sin. But whenever I did touch the paint, it left my fingerprint and I smudged the paint. So now I'm going in, and I'm not saying that I'm putting in details of the face, more is that I am back up to the lady, letting the horse dry. And so when I'm painting, I'll do an area, work on another area, go back to the previous area, and then jump back to the other. So I'm doing a lot of back and forth because I want to keep working, but I do need it to dry. And you might feel more comfortable pulling out a liner brush or a rigger brush to do all of these small details, but really, if you've got a round brush with a nice fine point on it, as long as you use a very light stroke and just use the tip of your brush, you can get those fine lines and details. And so I just want to say that to encourage you that you don't need to go out and buy a bunch of brushes. Get yourself a round brush. I find that to be the most versatile brush, at least for watercolor, because you can get big, bold strokes. You can cover large areas. Well, quote unquote large. I wouldn't go after a 12 by 16 or higher with my size 8 brush. But by putting the brush on its side, using its entire belly filled with water, I can cover a large area. Or by having water control, getting the excess moisture out of my brush and doing things very lightly with just the tip, I can get fine lines and paint details. So instead of buying a bunch of brushes, buy one good quality brush that holds a lot of water and has a nice fine tip. But to the woman up at the top, all I did was add a little bit of shadow from the fabric on her head to where it connects with her head to differentiate those two shapes. And then just a couple of lines to denote her eyes. In the reference image, which I don't have anymore, I just remember what it looks like. She was kind of like smiling, and you know how whenever you smile, your eyes can start to shut a bit, and they almost look like little half moon shapes? Well, that's kind of what her face looked like. And she was illuminated in light. And because this is a small painting, I didn't want to get so bogged down in the details. I just wanted to give enough information that says this is a person on a horse. And that she looks like she's having a good time. But also think about that when maybe even doing a larger composition too, and what you're trying to convey. What is the story of your piece? In this case, my story was quick piece of woman on horse. If by the end of this I get a convincing woman on a horse, it was a success. But if you're doing a portrait, then you'll probably want to get all of the fine details of her face. You'll want it to look exactly like that person. But in this case, I just need the feeling. I need the idea. I need to suggest to you what is going on. And because I like to paint in a loose, atmospheric manner, I want to give you enough information that your mind fills in the rest. In fact, the way I like to paint is almost borderline abstract, but I like to use realistic proportions. So almost like an oxymoron of abstract realism. And I think when I painted this painting, it might have been the first time I painted a horse. So right now I've got a damp brush and I'm flicking it in certain areas to soften any hard lines or lift any paint where I think that the value is getting a little too dark. One thing about Rose of Ultramarine is whenever you paint with it and it's fresh and wet, it looks more pink, but after it dries, and you'll see once you get to see the finished painting, it does look more purple. So it's very fascinating to me how a color can not only shift in that watercolor dries paler, but sometimes the color itself shifts as it dries. So one nice thing about that marker that I used is it didn't move when water hit it. And that was important because obviously if I painted watercolor, I don't want those lines getting mixed in with my paint. So now I've got my blow dryer, got it on a nice high heat, and look, the lines disappear. And there's my finished painting. So if you liked this video, press that like button so I know to make more like this. And if you want to see more, subscribe because I post videos every Monday and Thursday. Thanks so much for watching. I'll catch you next time. Bye!